All right. So first of all, before we get kicked off with all of the official business, Happy New Year to everybody. 2024 is officially here. The chapter that was 2023 is closed. So here's to a new year, right? And with that being said, new year, new me, right? All that kind of stuff, blah, blah, blah. But what we really want to talk about is everybody's got goals. We've got goals. How are we going to achieve them? And are we going to be able to comply with our desires and our wishes and our plans? So with me today, I've got head coaches Brian Miner and Jeff Alberts, and we're going to hopefully guide you all to what will be perfect compliance to your goals. No, not really, but wouldn't it be nice, right? But yeah. We're hopefully going to help you to comply with your wishes, comply with your coach's wishes, so that you can, attain what it is that you're after. And interestingly enough, I think that it's probably good that I've got these two gentlemen here joining me because, as we know, if there's anybody that can get the most out of people, it's these gents here. So, guys, first of all, coach me up here a little bit. I've got goals, right? And I'm going to be getting on stage. And some of my trouble points, I have to be a little bit of a braggart here. My wife has become a fabulous cook. And it is sometimes really hard for me to say, you know what, babe? I think I'm going to pass on that delicious XYZ that you made. I don't want to hurt her feelings, right? It's really good food that she makes. And I could measure it out, right? I could measure it out and kind of figure it out, right? But sometimes, it gets the better of me. So yeah, if this is my one issue, Jeff, how would you coach me through that?
I can relate, Brad, because I get homemade tortillas made here almost sometimes once a week, once every other week. And if you eat one, which is easy to track, because my wife just uses the flour and she'll just use maybe water. So they're typically low fat, but they taste so damn good. It's hard just to stop at one. So it's like that temptation, right? Like I have one and it's hard to stop at 2 or 3. So I just try to make it a point not to even have the one. And I have that dialogue with my wife that, right now I just have to buckle it down. I have to sacrifice. This isn't, this is nothing personal, if I'm not eating your food. But I have goals. This is what the goals are. This is what it entails. This is what I have to do. And this is the duration as far as, the sacrifice is going to last. So it's that communication that I have, with my wife and also my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law actually makes far better tortillas than my wife. And hopefully my wife isn't listening to this right now because I'm probably going to get in trouble. But I mean, let's face it, grandmas, nanas, they usually typically cook better than the wife, because they've been doing it a lot longer, right? So it's the experience level, right? So you're asking me as a coach, Brad, right? Like with all this experience.
Yes.
So she gets offended, like if I'm not eating her food. And the way I have to explain it to my mother-in-law is it's part of my job to be on a diet and watch what I eat. Because if I deviate, then it's going to impact my income. It's going to impact myself as a professional athlete. So then she kind of gets it and understands it. But literally when I walked off the world stage and the phone calls were coming in, I was, talking with her and all that. She's like, okay, so you're going to start eating my food again, right?
Yes.
So it's almost like that's kind of my first thought when it comes to that type of compliance.
Yeah. And making sure that I don't even have one. Because you're right. Sometimes I'll be like, you know what? I'll just have I'll have a half a cup of this, and sometimes that's all it takes is I just get that little taste of food in there. And then it's what is that? Lay's potato chips. No one can eat just one. Was that Ruffles or whatever? That's sometimes what I'm faced with. So, okay, communication with the wife. Don't even go there. Don't even have one. Brian, what do you have to add to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can all relate to this with, family that's not competing. Yeah, I mean, I think from her perspective, having to tell her like I need to restrain myself, otherwise I'm going to eat too many because it is good. Like that's that's sort of a compliment. It's not like no, I don't really want to eat your food. So it's, but I think that the biggest thing is just having clear communication before the start of an endeavor like a contest prep. And making sure everybody has the same expectations and yeah, you don't want to pull any surprises. Like, okay, like flip a switch. All of a sudden, like, oh, I didn't know you couldn't eat this. How long is this going to last? So then you're like, 8 months. So yeah, I think open communication is probably the biggest thing, which I'm sure you've checked that box. But, like Jeff said, sometimes there are situations where, if you have to have the restraint to just forego having any if you're susceptible to overconsumption, and I think for some people, there's going to be foods that can kind of lead to that. For me, it's like tortilla chips. Like I love tortilla chips, and I have to, that's something I'm going to have to regulate, how much of that is in our house during prep.
Do you find is it easier for you to be inclusive with something like that? Like, okay, I'm going to allow myself to have like a serving of this or 2 servings of this if I'm tracking it or whatever. Is that easier for you to be inclusive, or is it easier for you to do something like what I mentioned in this early stage? Like, you know what, I'm just going to just not even have this stuff in the house because of the temptation. Like,
yeah.
What's your experience?
So my experience with that is both. Like, it depends on where I'm at in the diet. At the onset of a diet, if I'm losing, the deficit's a bit larger. Like if the precision doesn't have to be really like militant, I'm more like I'm comfortable having just one, bowl of chips. I want another one. Like, and sometimes I wish I would have just had something else because then I wouldn't be hungry still. But as the diet gets further, like if I'm a month out from prep, I try to, like I would rather have less calorically dense sources just from a satiety perspective. But yeah, there's people that even, if you're still have a hearty intake on a deficit and you're still susceptible to overeating, based off certain foods, then yeah, just steering clear of those is sometimes a good option. But it's when I start getting really hungry deep into prep where it's like, okay, this isn't the best decision to even try to include this within the diet.
And Jeff, you actually took the conversation right where I wanted to go, because we've all coached our athletes. We've coached others that we're helping through those kind of situations, right? But sometimes there's that one client, there's that one person that's just like, I can't control myself. They're coming back, they're being honest. Coach, it happened again. I had too much of this. I had too many calories. I ate again. I ate way over. And sometimes I'm successful coaching people through that, and sometimes I'm not. I mean, one client comes to mind that he was chronically overeating, like weeks before his show. And he basically ate himself, out of condition. And I did everything I could to coach him through that. And I was never, successful. He basically just he got on stage, but it was not nearly the condition that he was in a few weeks before that, But that's exactly where I wanted to go. is we've got this client. We've tried everything, you know. At that point, what do we do? Is it their fault? Do we start setting up maybe some different goals? Do we start, you know, kind of, what can I do to help you through this? I mean, that is so hard sometimes when you're not successful. And I mean, kind of feel like sometimes I let them down.
I think in that situation, it's hard to, I mean, we can't place blame really on anybody, because I mean, at the end of a contest prep, it's like everything physiologically is driving to eat, you know. It's like you're starving, essentially. So I think what I would do in that situation would be, you know, see like, okay, what is the factor that's really playing a role here? Is it cravings? Is it like a craving that then leads to guilt and emotional eating that follows that? And trying to, if you can, isolate, you know, what is the trigger for these things. And I think a lot of times it starts as hunger and continues because of guilt and frustration. And I think some people are obviously more susceptible to, you know, emotionally driven eating than others. But, and, you know, I'm not going to pretend that we're experts in that area, which is, you know, why we have, you know, resources for people, you know, with that. But yeah, I think knowing the initial cause is an important part of that.
I think we've all had like adherence issues at one time or another, and there's been a few reasons for my non-compliance. Sometimes it's like the physical hunger, and then you kind of ask yourself, well, why am I this hungry? Is the protocol overly assertive that gets me to a point where I'm going to end up breaking regardless? Because I've done that to myself, where I've just been way assertive with the diet setup. So it's, you know, you just get to a point where you can't adhere no matter how hard you try, just because food is like right there in front of your face. Even though it's 100 feet from you, it feels like it's 1 foot in front of you, and you're going to end up doing it anyway. You're going to break. Then I've had other times where the commitment just wasn't there. Like I just wasn't 100% committed to the goal. You know, of course, like when you set a goal, everybody wants to attain it. Like you want to do it, but along the way, sometimes the commitment can kind of wane off for whatever reason. And I was struggling personally with this last prep about 3 or 4 months, you know, leading up to Worlds. I was kind of asking myself, do I really want to finish this off? Because there was a part of me that didn't really want to fully commit. Like I didn't want to adhere to the diet. Like I didn't want to give up my weekends socially, you know, having that glass of wine with my wife. And, you know, because there's, you know, let's face it, it's not just us as an athlete that's going to feel, you know, the sacrifice and all that we have to do to, you know, make it to our goal. It's the people along the way, you know, they're going to feel the impacts as well. So, you know, I'm sacrificing a weekend. You know, it's like, okay, I can't do the wine. I can't have the snacks. I can't like be 100% present watching a movie and things like that, because I'm just so in tuned to this one goal. So that was a big struggle for me, was just fully committing. And if you're even just 90% committed, like that 10% is enough to kind of, you know, throw things off where maybe it takes another month for you to reach the goal, or maybe you don't reach it at all. So those are just a couple of things that, for me personally, and with some of the athletes that I work with, that kind of like sabotages them as far as like the compliance. So it's almost like having to have like ask yourself or ask your athletes along the way, as far as the goal. Is the goal the same? Is it changing? You know, where's the level of commitment to it? You know, what are their factors outside, you know, the gym, as far as like home life, work life, like what kind of stressors? Because oftentimes stressors is what's going to create compliance issues as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, let's face it. A lot of this is kind of the setup, right? Getting everything set up from the get-go, like you guys talked about. Okay, I'm committed. I got to talk to my wife, right? I got to let her know this is my goal. These are my things that I'm going to have to do to get this, right? Okay, I'm going to have to be in a caloric deficit. That means that I'm going to have to know what I signed up for. I'm going to be hungry. There's going to be times where I'm going to be hungry, and I'm just going to have to embrace it, suck it up, whatever it is. But I got to know what I'm getting into, right? And there's going to be times where I'm low on energy, and there's going to be times when I'm going to have to either A, be inclusive, or B, I'm just going to have to choose not to include that and not even go there, right? So I feel like a lot of that setup is mandatory, right? And part of that setting that those realistic expectations. But now, look, the hard part about prep is we've got a lot to comply with, right? We got to comply with not only the diet, we've got to comply with our training, right? Jeff and I, we just recently had a fantastic Q&A where we were talking about the time commitment of getting 10, 12,000 steps every single day, and the time that it takes to get that done. So yeah, that setup for training, right? I mean, everybody says, I can train 5 days a week. I can train 6 days a week. Hour and a half, coach, 2 hours, you bet. I can do it. You whatever's the most optimal way to get me to where it is that I'm going to be, right? And I mean, you have to be realistic, because you're not sure. It sounds great now, but it's hard. It is really hard to communicate to that person that, you know what, trust me, I've been there. I've coached people that are going where you guys are going. When it comes to that setup and you trying to steer your athlete, your client, your family member that's asking you for help, how do you guys get that setup? Kind of, you can't get it nailed, right? But how do you get it to where it's like, we've got to set you up for success so that you will do what it is first and foremost that's going to move you to your goal. Brian, you're over there. I can tell you're chomping at the bit. You're just like, yeah. I'm seeing you nodding.
He got the hitman look. He's got that hitman look with that. He got a nice guy, mean look at the same time. So I'm gonna let Brian talk.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big proponent of planning ahead. I think, I've said this before. Most physique athletes have no shortage of motivation and willingness to put themselves through, torture at times, to get to the end goal. But a lot of people just don't plan ahead to provide the environment for success. And so I think there's kind of a checklist, that I kind of mentally go through with people. And, I think talking like, okay, who else is going to be affected by this? If you're wanting to do this, especially if they're a first-time competitor. Like if someone's competed before, they generally have a good idea of what to expect. But if somebody's a first-time competitor, just trying to paint a just completely realistic picture of what this process looks like before they even agree to move forward with this, I think is important, because you don't want any surprises. So the last thing you want is to get, 2 months into prep and realize, oh, wow, I didn't realize I was going to be eating, 1,500 calories less than I am now, or, whatever it is, doing 12 to 15K steps a day. Like that stuff takes time. And so, yeah, fitting it all within a day and just making sure people are aware of the time commitment and, if there's an obstacle there, okay, how can we maybe plan ahead to work around this? Like, I know for me, I'd like to prep next year, but I know it's going to be a significantly different experience for me going in. I've got 2 kids now versus 1. Both of them are now in activities, that most of the nights during the week, we're, taking them somewhere. So there's going to be times it feels like Tetris a little bit figuring this out. And I think for me, it's understanding that, I need to continuously remind myself that I need to make what I'm doing fit around all of this, to the best of my ability, because it's going to be a sacrifice for everybody. Like you said, Jeff, I mean, it's not just you that's sacrificing through a prep. And so, making sure people are okay with, okay, if you can't train this time, are you able to train, in the mornings if need be? And just kind of forecasting potential complications and how you're going to work around those, I think is important, especially for first-time competitors, because they will happen. But yeah, this is going to be, it's going to be a new experience for me to some degree. And so I'm trying to kind of imagine ahead of time what could be a complication for me. I think one of the biggest things is training. Like once my kids come home from school, it's like I can't be training at that time. Like I'm going to have to train in the morning or during the day in most cases, I think.
Are you expecting yourself to be perfect?
No.
With compliance, do you think?
No.
Have you, here's a question for you guys. Have you ever been 100% perfect with any of your guys' preps or any goals that you set out? Because I know you guys powerlift as well. It's like, has everything just been super, super perfect where it's like you're 100% on the entire time?
That's a good question, and it might be a good segue into the.
I think it's an
another
important
topic
question
too.
because I think it's going to find that we're relatable
Yes.
to everybody
so the answer
that's
is,
listening to this podcast.
I've never had a perfect prep. There's been times where I thought I was being on point when I realized after the fact I wasn't. And I think that kind of goes into some of the underreporting that's common with dietary intake, errors with tracking, relying too much on labels that might, not be completely accurate, things like that. But yeah, we're all human. We all go through, we're all in a state of, low energy availability in a prep when hunger is significantly higher and there's just that biological drive to consume food. And like that is going to bring out, it's going to test you. It's going to test everybody. And I think there's no shame in admitting when you know you aren't being compliant. And I think with me, I tell my athletes, I just want open communication. I don't expect perfection, but communicate with me. And if we have an obstacle, we'll navigate around it and do the best we can. But, you don't want it to spiral where it's like they don't want to be honest with you out of guilt, and because then it makes you question as a coach, okay, what is going wrong here? Why isn't this working when everything on paper, would seem like it should obviously be leading in the direction that we want to go. So it's like you're getting your money's worth by being honest with the coach.
Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez popping in to tell you that we just doubled the material in one of our most important video courses, the Injury Reduction and Management Q&A collection. It now includes 30 video chapters covering everything you need to know about caring for your body throughout your journey as a serious lifter and active adult. It's now over 5 hours of instruction, separated by topic and body part, from our team's injury reduction and management specialist, Dr. Nick Licamelli. This video collection is so universally valuable because every athlete is going to deal with pain at multiple points throughout their lifting career. You can wait it out, let it get worse, leave it untreated, and even take unnecessary time away from the gym and halt your progress. Or you can learn to manage it intelligently using the guidance from Dr. Nick in this course. He'll show you the principles of how to safely and effectively manage your own pain from a holistic and systematic perspective so that you can stay in the gym, do what you love, and keep as many of your hard-earned gains as possible. The Injury Reduction and Management Q&A collection is one of 22 courses in the 3DMJ Vault, which is our online learning platform of organized video-based education for serious lifters. You can become a VIP member to get access to every single one of those courses for just $25 a month or $85 a year. This means that once you complete this foundational course, you'll also have access to everything else you need to expand your training education, like bodybuilding program design, the lagging body parts course, and so much more. You'll also have access to our guided quick start materials, along with the entire 40 plus videos in the lifting library to select the right exercises to fit into your newly built customized training split that we provide for you. Go to 3dmjvault.com and sign yourself up today. That's 3dmjvault.com to get all access. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the rest of the show.
I had an athlete a few years back I was prepping, and there was like a 6 or 7 week stint. Like we hit a plateau, I made an adjustment, nothing happened. I made another adjustment, nothing. After about 4 weeks of this, I'm like, in my head, I'm like, the math just it's not adding up. Like this person should be making some progress. And then you start questioning your ability as a coach. Like maybe I just don't know how to make adjustments, right? So long story short, finished the prep out. We did okay. Ended up winning a novice division. But it was afterwards, after the prep was over, we met up on a video coaching call to set up the off season and all that. And basically this person confessed to having overages, like not tracking strawberries, not weighing certain things out, and just so these little things can obviously add up as far as calories was concerned. So it made me feel good knowing like, okay, it really wasn't my fault per se as far as the adjustments, but then I felt bad because I felt like maybe I didn't communicate to him enough that he can be just totally transparent and honest, even though I know I did say be transparent, but sometimes you have to like continue to express that to make him feel comfortable. And then, I kind of felt bad as well because I'm like, well, maybe the prep itself was just, again, like overly aggressive. Like maybe we were just doing things that just caused him not to adhere too well. So, maybe there was something I did in the setup and some of the adjustments leading up to that point. So just, having time afterwards to reflect on all that, it's like you said, it's so important to have like a good setup in the beginning, like understanding someone's context, understanding like their personality, what their lifestyle is like. So when you do set protocols up, in theory anyways, you're probably going to end up with a better process and a better end result. And then continuing to stress like the importance of open, honest communication. But man, I felt like terrible after that. Like, because I don't want this person to have a bad experience. It wasn't so much like the result, like the placing's like kind of like secondary. It's just almost like, man, as a coach, you're just really questioning yourself. And I learned a lot, just looking in hindsight.
Yeah, you guys are gonna probably give me crap for this, but I can honestly say my very, very first prep. I mean, first of all, I am a procedure guy. You give me a manual and a procedure, and I will follow it to the T. And I was following a procedure guy who basically had a procedure of how he did things. And for 6 months, believe it or not, I never once cheated. I never once strayed from my plan. I never, diet-wise and work and training-wise, it was perfect. I never missed a workout. I never missed a set. Every week, I followed a meal plan, and I would just prep my food on the weekends. And my plan was just like my coach. I'm going to reduce this meal from 1 scoop of protein powder to a half a scoop. This meal, I'm going to reduce from 12 ounces of chicken to 8 ounces of chicken. I made these little weekly reductions, and I never weighed myself. I never once weighed myself the entire prep because it was not part of the procedure. The procedure was you start with this many calories, with these meals, with each food in this meal that you eat at this time. It was a procedure, and I followed it to the letter. And basically, the moral of the story here is that was tremendously stressful. It was tremendously stressful. I got on stage. I did well. I was shredded. Jaws were dropped. And a guy said, you should go to this other show in Sacramento in 2 or 3 weeks, and you are going to probably do really, really, really well. And I was like, there is no way in hell I am doing that show. I am not continuing this for one more freaking day. It was literally that stressful. And then a year later, I did another prep, and same thing. I followed it worked the first time, right? I'm going to follow the exact same thing. Followed my little procedure. It was even harder because I was working graveyard shift. And I was doing these things where I would hit my menu by midnight, and then at midnight, because I'm still up, I would start the next day. So it's kind of like that would be the next day, the next menu. I'd start from meal one. You know what I mean? And I remember vividly, I was an X-ray tech. I was working at the hospital, and I was in the dark room in surgery, and I brought my food down with me. And I brought down, instead of just 3 rice cakes, I brought down the sleeve of rice cakes, and I ate 2 more rice cakes than I was supposed to. And I felt tremendously guilty because of that. And that prep was even more stressful. And again, I got great results from it. I nearly won my pro card, but I did after that year, I didn't want to compete again. I was done after those 2 years of doing that. Same thing. I never missed a workout. I never missed a cardio session. I was doing cardio on the stairs at the hospital in the middle of the night, making sure that I got my 5 minutes in, that I needed to get in. And it almost ruined me. I almost never competed after those 2 years of what I would consider to be like perfect prep. Right now, in hindsight, I should have probably put more emphasis on my posing. That was kind of something as a side note that was not perfect, right? But looking back at that, you guys, I don't know how the hell I did it. I have no idea how I managed to do that. And I remember vividly, like people would bring in food. I didn't want to have even a bite of it, but I wanted to smell it. They had pizza. I wanted to smell the pizza. For me, just smelling it was...
You're a smeller, Brad, though.
Enough.
I always found that a little weird about you deep into prep. He's like sitting at the table, right? Everybody's at the table having their food. And he's like, can I smell that? I'm like, what do you mean smell it? And he's like, I'm like, that is like torture right there. That's so torture,
But I don't know how I did it, you guys. It almost ruined me.
I had a similar experience my first prep too, where I just had basically a meal plan that I was following. And I think in hindsight, you question, how did I do that? And I think the answer is usually you just didn't know better. You just,
exactly.
Okay, this comes with the territory.
Agree.
This is what I'm doing. And so part of me, and maybe you can relate to this, Brad, part of me, I'm glad I went through that because it made subsequent preps just seem so much more fun and easy by comparison. It's like, okay, I went through this, made it through barely, but let's do this more intelligently now. Structure is good, but like pliable structure is better. And so that's I can relate to that though, because
but it kind of comes back to like the level of commitment though, right?
Yeah.
Like even though the plan wasn't like the greatest on paper and you might not have known that, but you guys were like 110% committed to the goal. So you did whatever it took to reach that goal.
Yeah.
So that's probably like a big as the reason why you followed through and made it to the end. Would you agree?
Yes.
Oh, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I put a ton of pressure on myself. I had just started Healthy Bodies Fitness, the gym, and I was like, I've got to win this show. I have got to do everything that I can to win this show because the success of this business depends on my success and how I place and how I do, because I can advertise that. That was my thing. I put a ton of pressure on myself, and that it like doubled down, kind of on my commitment and my willingness to kind of be perfect. But man, at the end, it like I said, it darn near ruined me.
2002 was probably the closest thing I came to a perfect prep as far as not the setup, but the actual compliance. There was only 2 occasions where I deviated. One, my ex-wife and I went to a Warriors game, so I didn't do my cardio that night. That was one. The other one was I got so hungry that I wasn't refeeding her. I didn't know anything about refeeds or diet breaks or any of that stuff. I just knew one way to prep, and that was like you, Brad, just go at it and go hard. I got so hungry. Right after work, as I was working at the auto plant, I went to 7-Eleven,
got out, bought like 4 protein bars, the metric bars. Like, I'm just going to have one on the way home. I ate all 4. And then I got home and then I ate again. And then I felt so much guilt. Like I did something just horribly wrong. But, of course, in hindsight, I'm like, man, if I was a starving caveman, I would have bought more than 4 protein bars. And it would have been normal to consume as much food as I possibly could so I don't starve and die. But because we're in today's social modern world where, having abs is supposed to be normal, like that's where the guilt was. Like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Like, I'm going against my protocol. And it's just like a tremendous amount of guilt. And then the next day, instead of just, having amnesia, like this is what I coach my athletes now. If you have an overage, let's find what the root cause is. Like, okay, did we go a little too hard leading up to that point? So maybe that's my fault, not your fault. The reason why you had 4 metrics bars and whatever else I ate afterwards. But, what can we do to fix that? But I lost my train of thought. Maybe I need more carbs.
Well, I think there's a difference.
But I was just like, it's just so, there was a guilt. Like, it's just the next day I basically was doubling down on things. Like I would cut calories down, then I would do more cardio. And then it's like, I'm intensifying hunger and intensifying all those signals instead of just like, okay, let me go to the root cause. Let me make some corrections, or let's just stick to what we're doing and just kind of carry on and forget about it.
Yeah, usually there's some upstream trigger for something like that, or maybe not trigger, but yeah, maybe it is an overly assertive protocol up to that point. And yeah, there's times in prep where like you're going to have to, like you're going to be eating very little. In a lot of cases. So I think, yeah, as a coach, I think that's a good reminder. But I tell my athletes too, it's like, don't have guilt for having those, like, don't feel guilty because you want to eat, like this is normal that you're starving right now. Because a lot of people have guilt, like, okay, I'm not committed to the goal. I'm tempted to have this. And just the temptation alone makes them guilty. And then, if they have the food, then they get guilt from that. And then it can just, like you said, you want to avoid the situation where now you're trying to compensate the day after. Like that's definitely a scenario we want to avoid. I think one thing I think is worth touching on here is, with underreporting on the diet side, if we have an athlete who is in prep, we can tell it's getting into the thick of it a bit. Baseline hunger is elevated significantly, and let's say they're not losing, and there's going to be variability in individual metabolism, obviously, but there is sort of, as coaches, there's sort of these thresholds where it's like, okay, we shouldn't have to go below this point before we start to maybe question, okay, is it maybe an adherence issue? And I think there's, 2 kind of scenarios here where one of them is, is there guilt that they're not, telling me that they're, over consuming, or is it possible, and I think this is often the case, where they're not aware that they're underreporting. And I think that's one thing we probably see quite a bit, especially with first-time competitors, where they, maybe they haven't tracked their nutrition, prior to that, prep or leading up to that prep. It's kind of a new process for them. But what are some of the things that you guys have seen where that can kind of lead to underreporting? And, when you start to peel back layers, you realize, this is probably why, like they might think they're consuming 2,000, maybe they're consuming 2,600. Because I think one of the big ones for me is, a lot of nutrition labels, it'll list like volume, like a cup, and then it'll list the weight. And so a lot of times people, like peanut butter is the classic example, right? Like 2 tablespoons, 32 grams. But if you were to like, if I were to eyeball 2 tablespoons and weigh it, it would probably be like 50 grams, you know? So
I was say that could be 50 to 60 real easy.
yeah. So I think is like, I don't like putting unnecessary structure on things until it's needed. But especially at the end of a prep, when we want the deficit, we want it to be smaller. Like, we don't want to be accelerating through the finish line. We want it to be a smooth landing. You know, we want to protect muscle mass. The deficit should be lower, and sometimes just a couple hundred calories a day. But with that comes the reality that there's a lower margin of error there. You know, if you have 3 tablespoons of peanut butter versus 2, I mean, that deficit is going to close, you know, significantly, you know, and, you know, you might be at 120 gram or 120 calorie deficit, whatever. So I do think in the situation where someone's trying to get the last bit of fat off, just that is the time where I think being like having a meal plan can actually be pretty helpful for people. You know, or a default menu that they go to where they know what they're consuming. You know, they've weighed it out, they know what they're consuming, because up to that point, when time is on your side, like you can get away with some of that stuff. But I mean, do you guys have experience with that where, you know, the light bulb moment has gone off where like, okay, maybe these people are consuming, you know, they're assigning another common one, assigning the raw value for chicken or meat after they cook it, you know, and so that can increase by, you know, 25-30% the calories. And so there's things like that I think as coaches, when I've isolated that's what I feel when I feel guilty, because like that's part of our job is to educate them on that. And sometimes it doesn't really surface until the later stages when there's less margin of error.
You have to kind of call an audit with empathy.
Exactly.
You know, it's like, okay, I need to audit. And, you know, sometimes just not looking at your MyFitnessPal is a thorough audit, because how they actually weigh it out and track it can make a difference. Like you said, like 2 big tablespoons of peanut butter, that could just be a couple big scoops. Whereas if you weigh it out, it's going to be far more accurate. So that could be the difference of progress or not. And I think when we look at like exercise form, right? Like everybody wants to be really skillful at it. You know, make sure everything's nice and clean. Eccentrics are controlled, pauses, good sound concentrics, but that's skill, right? It's the same thing in the kitchen. There needs to be a level of skill in the kitchen too. Putting things on a scale accurately, you know, and here's another one too. I don't know if maybe you guys have come across this, is people consuming the food before they actually put it into their app. So at the end of the day, they've consumed all their food and then they forget what they actually ate.
Yeah.
I come across that quite often too.
I do that. I do that sometimes.
Yeah. So I think just, you know, for accountability, it's like, okay, whatever you consume, make sure it's tracked first before you actually consume it. So little things like that can make a difference. But I agree with you. It's like there's a time and place for being that tedious with things, you know, when it calls for it, you know, when you're, you know, deep into prep or something like that. But I think like not just like for preppers, but when we're talking about like our bodybuilders who don't compete, right? Like they still want to change body composition, but there's no hyper-focused goal of getting on stage. Like that can be a little bit more of a challenge with compliance. So how do you guys tackle someone who's serious but not that serious as far as changing their body composition? Because obviously it still does take a level of commitment and adherence to take them to where they really want to go. What about you, Brad?
Well, yeah, like you said, Jeff, that's a skill that has to be developed that most people don't have, right? And so you have to kind of I have had the most success when I take people through levels of developing that skill, just like with exercise form, you know. You first kind of demonstrate, okay, this is how you do a squat. You know, I'm paying attention to hip hinge and head up and et cetera, you know, and when they get underneath that bar, that's hopefully not the first time that they've done a squat. They've probably done some body weight squats, and they've kind of focused on these things. And so it depends on the person, obviously, but you have to take them through levels, right? So the person wants to change their body composition, and basically I want to help them establish habits and that skill of, okay, we need to do something different than what you have done before, right? Commonly it's lose weight, right? We have to lose weight, okay? So we have to basically know that we have to be hungry at times. Are you ever hungry? Do you ever have your stomach growl, have them relay that to me. And I'm like, okay, well, right now what we need to do is we just need to make sure that, you stick to the structure that you have, but you just want to be a little bit hungry before you eat, and you want to walk away without that food baby that you usually have, and just kind of take them through levels like that. Then there's the opposite. There's people that track everything meticulously, right? And they won't think about eating something unless they at least have an idea of what those calories are, Well, now let's kind of do the opposite. Let's kind of think to ourselves, okay, if these are the calories that I'm taking in, what does that feel like intuitively, right? Okay, so when you're done eating that meal, hitting that many macros, are you full? Are you just satiated? Do you have a food baby? Could you eat more? There's always these levels of skill that you have to take them through, when they want to make a change to their body composition, whether they want to lose weight, whether they want to, go the other way, and they need to be a little bit fuller, after meals. That's sometimes is really hard to take, especially ladies through, because they're used to always being hungry. And it's like, well, you know what? That's not going to work to make the changes that you want to make, to recomp the other direction and start actually synthesizing new muscle. You're going to have to be hungry, on occasion. And so sometimes you have to have them track a little bit to get them those feelings of, okay, this is what it feels like to have this many calories. And then you can kind of start walking kind of both edges of the line there. But it for me, it kind of boils down to, you got to teach them those skills through levels. And everybody wants things tomorrow, and it's what is that saying? You can do things right the first time, or, you can screw it up, get what you want, and then fall out of it later. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I echo everything you said there. I think it is a process with people. It is harder for non-competitors, for sure. And I think we see this with competitors, coming out of shows. They don't have that deadline. And so their level of compliance is usually lower, and it's expected to be, honestly. But yeah, as far as, the non-competitor goes, what you said, I mean, just going through sort of a process of troubleshooting it and gaining that skill set, like experience it trumps everything, really. I mean, if you have enough experience at something, you're more self-aware of where you're lacking. And, I like what you said, asking them, do you know what it feels like? How often are you full, or how often are you feeling hungry? And learning to be comfortable with that, especially in a fat loss phase. And like, okay, there's some of this that comes with the territory, but how can we mitigate it? Like, what are your food sources? Are you eating just protein bars and ice cream all day, or is it like, are you actually having a whole food diet primarily? And, for some people, I mean, I know when, like, If It Fits Your Macros kind of started to get more traction, like in 2010 or so, it was almost like a flex for people to include as much junk into their diet as they could and still make progress, and that's not what it's about. And so looking at, food sources, I think the other thing too is, somebody is chronically hungry and they're eating whole foods, looking at things like hydration. I think that's something that I know personally is big for me. Like if I am busy, I tend to slack on my hydration. And so if I feel hungry, I first ask myself, what have I drank today? And sometimes it's very little. So staying on top of that, staying on top of protein intake, whole foods, adequate fiber intake. I mean, those are the boxes that we can check that are within our control. And outside of that, it's, the magnitude of deficit and just accepting that it's part of the process. And, Berto's talked about this before. The people that run from the hunger are the people that tend to be hungrier. Like if you embrace it, you tend to and there's this acceptance that it's part of the process. It's a lot easier in my experience. And I think, Jeff, at one point, and this might have been years ago, but I remember you mentioning something like in a contest prep or in a fat loss phase, if you're hungry, like obviously hunger doesn't perfectly correlate with being in an energy deficit. But if your baseline hunger is increasing across a fat loss phase, like that's usually a pretty good sign that you're heading in the right direction. So you can kind of look at that as a positive. Like, okay, if things are getting harder, I'm hungrier on average, my baseline appetite is a little bit higher. Like that's your body trying to close the deficit because it's in one.
Yeah.
So just and I try to adopt that in prep, where when I'm hungry, it's like I'm just gonna marinate in it, just this is
Embrace
like
it,
I'm taking, climbing rungs of the ladder right now towards, the condition that I want to
try
get.
to spin it as a positive.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, because if you're looking at with a pessimistic mindset, then you're just going to have negative energy.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's hard to go through life with negative energy. But if you're like, okay, I'm a little hungry, chances are that means I'm in a deficit. Well, that's kind of the goal here, is fat loss. So it's doing what it's supposed to do right now. So I find that a little motivating. Now, of course, I don't want it to get overly extreme, because then I'm going to have the adherence issues like I mentioned before. But I just mentally try to embrace the suck a little bit, embrace the hunger as a positive. And, as far as like decision fatigue too, like, how many times have you seen dieters that are in the kitchen, 3-4 hours in the kitchen trying to come up with some fancy meal that only has 300 calories in it? You're spending all this time and energy, trying to concoct this thing. And then when you finally eat it, you realize, like, I'm still hungry.
Yeah.
When you could have just had like a protein shake or, something simple. And 5 minutes later, you're not hungry. You took the edge off. You're fine.
Yeah.
Now you can go another 3 or 4 hours throughout your day and be productive in other areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what I've tried. Like, I think that just comes with a level of experience and maturity when it comes to being in a deficit too. What about, so spinning away from just dieting, what about people that are in the gym? Like you set them up with a nice training program, X number of sets where you feel like, okay, this is probably their sweet spots, but they're kind of deviating away. They're not complying with it. Like they're wanting to do more. Like they're always like an extra set they throw in, or an extra exercise or two, or adding another day or two into their training week. Like
the
how do you guys kind of go
overzealous type?
about that? Yeah, the overzealous type, like, like they're probably shooting themselves in the foot from a supply and demand perspective. They're probably slowing their progress down just because they're generating like more fatigue than it really needs to be. So how do you guys go about that with athletes that are a little overzealous?
I'll be honest with you. I've had mixed ways of dealing with that. And when I say that, as of right now, I have one athlete that I am not successful with. He still does it no matter what. I've had people that I'm able to preemptively keep them from doing that, and then, to be honest with you, the most success happens when they realize the consequences of their actions. And so what I mean by that is they want to do more, they sneak in an extra set here and they sneak in an extra set there. And then it never fails 3 weeks down the road or a next block or whatever, elbow tendonitis, because it's always curls. Guys are going to do more curls, And And now we got, tennis elbow. We've got epicondylitis, we've got medial epicondylitis, lateral, whatever. And it's like, this is what I'm talking about. You didn't understand what I was telling you when I said I'm reluctant to add this set. I don't want you doing extra sets of this because it ends up being this as the consequence of it, So that's where the most success lies, is when they can actually see the consequences of their own actions. But some people that are super, super coachable, it's you're able to kind of say, okay, look, again, I've been there. I've done what it is that you're doing, and this is what happened. This is what happened, et cetera. Just kind of trust the process, bear with me here, know that we're doing things smart. We're setting you up for success. You're adhering to the plan, right? We're keeping you healthy, that's kind of how I'm able to actually, preemptively do that. But then, other folks, I don't know, sometimes they can't help themselves. And I have trouble with those people. It's like, well, you know what? They're getting away with it. So what do I do? How do I coach them out of that? Do I wait until the results, the consequences of their actions actually end up, revealing themselves? So Brian, I'll throw that over to you because I'm at a loss there.
Yeah.
Do you ever have that conversation though, Brad? Like, it kind of stems, like most of the time when people try to do more volume, it's because they're overeager or they're insecure. They're overeager because they want to get to maybe where we're at, like by next week, or they're insecure because they feel like if they don't do it, they're not going to progress at the rate they want, or they're going to actually regress. So do you ever have that conversation around the insecurities and the overeagerness, and then kind of just having them understand like nothing bad is going to happen if you're only doing 10 sets a week versus 15 sets? Like you're not going to actually shrink. Like you're not going to lose muscle tissue.
See, that's a great question, Jeff. That is a great question because...
Or explaining to them the supply and demand principle, which I know you know a lot about. So do you ever have that conversation with them?
The one I'm lacking is the insecurities. That one, I can honestly say, I've never really thought about even crossing that bridge, the insecurities. That's something I'm not really very astute at.
As coaches, sometimes our role is to protect the athletes from themselves, especially when they're overzealous.
You're
like
right
that.
There.
And I think what you said, Brad, was spot on. Experience and going through and seeing the consequences, and this applies, I think, to everything in life. It's like my parents have told me, growing up, not to do shit, and it's like, okay, like
Brian, don't do that.
And
Brian, don't do that.
I do it, and
if you do that, this is what's gonna happen. And you do it, and you're like, you got a big like knot on your head. Like I told you not to do it.
Exactly. And I mean, that's you see this with parenting too. It's like eventually you're like, I told you so. but I to try to, like when I get people on Skypes and we talk about volume, or when we're entering a prep, I think a big part of it is education on the onset, and explaining supply and demand, or fitness and fatigue. And I think with volume, it's a very oversimplified topic for a lot of people, or like they view it as more is better. And we look at studies that show that more is better, but you also have to realize like that's up to a point. And the studies that, are showing exorbitant amounts of volume being beneficial, I like to remind people, like this is maybe an 8-week study, and maybe they're doing 2 exercises. Let's put this in the context of a full program. Like there's no way you're going to survive this. It's illustrating a concept. And so what I like to tell people, usually when I encounter that, it's that they're overemphasizing the stimulus side of things. They think, greater stimulus equals greater adaptation, better muscle retention, when fatigue has a feedback to that. If you're under recovered, your stimulus is going to suffer. And so in a prep that becomes, or fat loss phase, even in in a surplus, that can be a problem where people are spending beyond their means, with regards to the stimulus. And so, trying to explain to people that, that, like you said, Jeff, going from 15 down to 10, that's not assuring them nothing bad is going to happen here. You might you might feel better, your joints might feel better, and let's address this before you do have joint discomfort and things like that. But one thing I've had a lot of luck with lately is explaining the relationship of training volume to people is there's an exponential decrease in benefit with an increase in volume. So the research I always kind of reference is this meta-analysis by Schoenfeld. I think it was the one in 2017 looking at volume, where they had groups doing less than 5 sets a week, groups doing 5 to 10, and then groups doing 10 or more sets a week. The groups that were doing 10 or more saw better progress, which isn't terribly surprising, right? But what was interesting from that was the groups that were doing, at a minimum 100% more volume than the low volume group, they only got 36% more hypertrophy on average. It was something pretty low. So it wasn't okay, we're doubling the volume, we're going to get twice the output. That's not how it works. And so understanding even if you can just get the minimum amount, that's still carrying, that's driving the majority of your stimulus. Anything beyond that, there's an increased opportunity cost with adding more volume. And that continues to increase more and more with more volume that you add. And so for me, it explaining that has helped people sort of understand okay, there's a trade-off here, but it's not as big as I thought it was. And usually, and maybe you guys can speak to this, but when I get an application, if I were to compare the amount of times that I'm increasing someone's volume from what they were doing versus decreasing, I'd say more often than not, it's decreasing. Rarely am I seeing someone's volume okay, wow, you're doing very little. Because a lot of people that apply and work with us are highly motivated. They often get in their own way because they're because of that motivation. And so pulling back and understanding we're looking for that sweet spot in terms of recovery and stimulus and for longevity, because wanting it now is the biggest thing with obstacle that I encounter with the young athletes is they want to push it hard in order to make the most progress they can in the shortest amount of time. But when you get injured, that is a big bottleneck for long-term progress with people. And so keeping them healthy, keeping it sustainable, and just letting time do its thing, and look back, 10 years from now, and you'll be glad you did, in most cases, going a more moderate approach versus redlining it every chance you get.
At the very minimum, rearranging volume, right? To where it's you know what, you really probably don't have to do 15 sets of curls every week. Yeah. You're getting plenty of stimulus on that, all those exercises that are doing elbow flexion. We can probably cut that at a minimum in half. And then we'll just kind of see where it goes from there, and yeah, it's amazing how the first thing that always happens, joints start feeling a little bit better. Not long after that, I'm a little stronger. I can actually curl weight that I haven't really curled before. And then not long after that, especially if they're in a bit of a surplus, it's wow, my arms have grown.
Yeah.
Well, what? Imagine
you expose
that.
them to it. I try to be a little bit of a salesman, try to sell them on it a little bit if they're not really buying in. Okay, let me see if I can get some buy-in, even if it's temporary. Okay, just give me 2 weeks or give me 3 or 4 weeks. Just adhere to it. Worst thing that could happen is you do happen to regress, let's say just a little bit. It's temporary though. We can always go back to where you were. you'll pick everything back up. But usually you just expose them to that. They kind of see either nothing that bad happens, or there's something, like you said, Brad, you see maybe a little growth, or your strength levels kind of inch up a little bit. It's like, oh, okay, now I'm gaining more confidence in this. That eventually over time, going from 15 sets down to 10, it's like not a big deal.
Yeah. That's a good point, because I remember there's a few experiences that I can note where it was these like light bulb moments, like, okay, maybe I don't need to be doing this much. And it's when when my firstborn was born, I took probably 2 weeks out of the gym, like the initial gauntlet. But I remember heading up to that, I was pushing it pretty hard in the gym and started to feel a little beat up. And then I had planned on training after he was born in those first couple weeks, because I had a gym at home still at the time. And it wasn't like, I just found like I didn't have really the energy for it. Sleep was terrible. And I think I got like just 1 or 2 highly uninspired sessions and, just kind of going through the motions. But after those 2 weeks, once I reintroduced regular training, like I was stronger than I was before I left off. So it was a good reminder and experience for me that taught me, like, one, time off isn't the end of the world. Like there's for some people with deloads, like if they're going on vacation, like, hey, if you don't want to train this week, we've been pushing it pretty hard up to this point. Like, we just take the week off. If you want to do some body weight stuff, you want to do 1 or 2 sessions, but there's no guilt that should be associated with enjoying your trip, And oftentimes people will come back and be like, you're right. And it's a learning experience for them. And it's easier to, keep that message going, moving forward.
You know what I want to do, guys? I want to totally flip this whole conversation kind of upside down on its head in a way, and talk about the athletes that are ready. They are ready. They want to compete, and it's been a while. They've got this drive to do it, but guess what?
You're talking about yourself, aren't you, Brad?
Oh, no. This is not me.
I thought he was going to ask us, what's your favorite smells? Let's really flip this.
That would really flip it upside down, yeah. But it's funny that you mentioned that, Jeff, because I have been here before, right? I want to compete. I am ready to compete. I feel like I've made progress, but guess what? I don't think I'm going to be able to comply, because things are not perfect right now. This is going to happen and that's going to happen. I'm not going to be able to execute my plan, like I want to do it, or I'm not going to be able to execute it perfectly, or, fear and insecurity that there's too many things that are going to get in my way and it's going to be harder than it needs to be, or I'm going to be unsuccessful, right? I've got a few people like that in the past, and that is something that I have not been successful coaching people through, and I've been there. I was like that in 2011. I wanted to compete bad, and I was always in this kind of stop and go. It's kind of like I was executing just fine, but I got this coming up. There's work coming up. There's that coming up. I'm not going to be able to execute, and I would almost set myself up for failure, because what would end up happening is I'm telling myself, I'm not going to be able to execute this plan. And sure enough, I wouldn't, or I would be trying to get away with something that I know, that wasn't working. Now, eventually it kind of worked itself out, you know what I mean? But yeah, I've had a few people that are like, they really want to do this, but at the same time, they're not willing to make that dive, take that step, dive in, unless everything is perfect, right? You guys ever have that?
Yes. I have that with myself.
Well, let's say, yeah. I mean, the expectation of being perfect, like we talked about it earlier, like, I don't think none of us has been entirely perfect. And when we were perfect, we probably shouldn't have been perfect. We should have probably made mistakes or deviated, so we can learn from those experiences, which only helps to navigate the future as far as having good adherence when you really need good adherence, but also like maybe only having 90% adherence, because that's probably a better way for the process to kind of continue on. So it sounds like what you're trying to say, Brad, is like fear, like of failure, is like just kind of stopping people from actually even taking that first step.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be like my son, like, okay, you can't go to school today unless we have everything perfect before you even get there. Like, I need to have the truck parked in this same spot. I need to have your breakfast at this time. You need to have this. Like, that's how he's going to learn, is just navigating the real world and, you know, having things thrown at him and different things. So you get that exposure. And yeah, you're going to fall on your face. But I think that's why we're all pretty good bodybuilders, is because we've had a lot of failure along the way. We've learned from it. And having awareness with it, like not just, hey, I messed up, you know, hey, let's do the same mistake again. It's like, no, having awareness around why these things happen, and let's try to find a different way of doing it the next time and see if we have a better result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sustainability is like it's the foundation of this. And if you're 100%, if the goal is 100% perfect or bust, you probably won't often see that finish line that you're after. And I think with probably all three of us, one thing I'm having to do right now is manage my expectations of how I'm gonna, you know, if I do this prep, like how am I going to navigate this? And I need to be okay with the fact that the landscape of things is different, and there's going to be probably some more flexibility required of me, because it's not like when I was, you know, in college and I didn't have as many responsibilities, not to like downplay, you know, what personal responsibility at that age, but it's like it gets more challenging as you get older. And I think that's where you need to be able to pivot a bit and understand that the approach, like the stride length might not be the same each day, you know, but it's still a step forward, and giving yourself an ample timeline in order to still reach that finish line that you want to get to. And I think that's, you know, that's the big, it kind of goes back to just planning and knowing what you're getting into, forecasting these issues, and giving yourself a timeline that affords that flexibility.
It's kind of like sounds like you're talking like the on-off switch, right, Brad? Like light switch is on, but if something comes up, it's like, oh, I'm just going to turn everything off.
Yeah.
That's it. Whereas you kind of treat it as a dimmer switch. There's going to be times where you turn the dimmer switch all the way up because the environment is, you know, it's a good one. Like it's a straight shot. You know, you might have things pop up. It's like, okay, now I turn the dimmer switch down to 80%. You're still moving yourself forward. Maybe it's not as fast as 100%, but you're still powering forward, and you're not actually stopping or taking a step back, because you're just shutting everything down. So it's understanding that. So you can't expect yourself to be 100% all the time. And if you think 100% all the time, like think of the energy required for that, the physical, the mental, and emotional. Like I ran, when I first started competing, 93, 94, 95, back to back to back. Like I was a machine for 3 years, and eventually I hit a wall. Then I just couldn't keep the switch on at all. Like it was just, I was done. And if I had a dollar for every time I told my ex-wife how many times I was going to retire, I probably would have been retired and multi-millionaire by now. So, you know, you fizzle out. So you have to understand how to kind of like, you know, navigate your energy systems. So if you treat it like a dimmer switch, you'll probably find more, like Brian says, like sustainability. You know, you will get to year number 38 where I'm at now. You know, because you learn to kind of dial things up and down appropriately. Because if I would have had that same mentality, like, you know, because it was 93, 94, 95, then it was 97, 98, 99. Then it was, you know, another 2-3 years. It was like I just kept burning myself out over and over and over again. So you got to learn to dial that switch.
Yeah, because we hear that all the time with any endeavor. People are trying to start a new business. Well, I'll start a new business when all the bills are paid off, you know, or I'll do this when everything is just perfect, you know. And you hear it all the time from motivational people. If you wait until everything is perfect to start to do what it is that you want to do, you'll never do it. You'll never make it. And I mean, I can't tell you, there's at least 3 people off the top of my head that basically never got on stage. They wanted to bad, but they never made it because life happens. You know, in one case, child was born. It was like, well, crap, there goes that prep, you know, and then pretty soon, one thing after the other, you guys know how it is with kids. Pretty soon there's the desire is gone. There is no prepping that's going to happen now. And I missed that chance. I never got on stage, you know, or, you know, the person that like I was talking about earlier that wants to get going with this, but they want to have everything perfect. You know, I've had one like that before, you know, and they never made it. They never got that box checked off, you know, and that's kind of one of the things that I pass stories, little anecdotes, you know, along to people that are waiting, you know, for everything to be perfect. And Jeff, just like you said, I went, what I felt like was as close to a perfect prep as I could have possibly had. 6 months, never missed a workout, never deviated from my plan. And it darn near ruined me. It almost made me to where I did not want to compete again. And so really with that being said, you know, do you really want to wait until everything is perfect and you can be 100% compliant and you can have just like this perfect execution, knowing full well that Coach Brad and even Jeff was there and we kind of burned ourselves out, you know, and it almost kind of ruined us for the sport. So anyhow, guys, that was the last little note that I made here on my little Post-it notes on where I wanted to go and flipping the conversation upside down. How about you, gents? Anything you want to add to this?
I thought we were pretty compliant throughout.
Jeff, just like always, perfect bow on the present.
All right, people, we have a lot of goals for 2024. Let's try to be as compliant as possible. But if you deviate, have some self-empathy. It's okay. Get back on the horse and just keep going.
And Happy New Year's, guys.